Welcome back, everybody. This is the Product Uncensored show with your host, Colin Pell. We are at episode number 12, so hoorah! I wanted to start today by just apologizing to our followers that I haven't been able to put out new shows or new episodes in the last few weeks. This wasn't by design, and maybe one day I'll tell you the story why. But in the meantime, I hope that you have enjoyed the content we've been putting out on Twitter and Instagram. Follow if you have not. Now, if you are new to the show, or even if you are a seasoned follower, I hope that you have clicked on the subscribe button down below, and more importantly, click on the notification bell next to it so that you will be notified every time we have new content. For those of you who believe that the Product Uncensored show should only be heard and not seen, we also have good news for you. We are available on all major podcasting platforms such as Anchor, Spotify, Google, and Apple. So do listen to it there. And don't forget to click follow as well. Now, our guest today is a very, very special guest. He's so special that I can't even describe him. So apparently this is the best way to introduce him. He's a British Indonesian with an Australian passport. Now, how interesting is that? He is the Chief Product Officer of Brankas. Please welcome to the show, Mike D. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Hey, happy to be here. And great to see you again, Colin.
Yes. For those of you who know both of us, we go back a little bit. We're part of this collective of product people within the Southeast Asian region. So always good to have a friend back on the show. So Mike, let's start with all the interesting stuff because your story gets interesting right from the get-go, right? So tell us a little bit about who you are, because that's interesting.
Yeah, sure. Cool. So going way back when, I was born in Jakarta, and I grew up over there. My father is from England, from the United Kingdom. I was just saying to Colin earlier, he's from Newcastle originally.
Boo!
And, oh, damn. Harsh. It is torture. It is torture. And my mother is from Indonesia, so she is Manadonese, and well, part Manadonese, part Ambonese. So that's where she's from. So yes, I grew up in Indonesia. I was living there pretty much all my the start of my life. I was there for around 17 years odd. And you know, my experience in Indonesia growing up was a bit of a, I guess, unique one. I went to an international school in Jakarta, British International represent, and I also did a lot of travel up to the more rural parts of Indonesia, such as Manado, Maluku, and other parts, right? My father was very much a man of travel. He wanted to see the world, especially on the broken path, and see, you know, what was effectively, you know, like so very, very different to his life growing up in the United Kingdom. So yes, I grew up there, had a taste of both worlds really, and I then moved to Australia to continue my studies. And I was there for around about 10 years. I studied the Bachelor of Science at the University of New South Wales, and I pretty much went straight into sort of the corporate-y type of life, after the fact, right? And then from there, 10 years. I eventually met my girlfriend, who is now my wife, and then about 4.5 years ago, I have now moved to Singapore, where I have been ever since. A lot of travel back and forth, as Colin well knows, between the different countries over here. Not so much anymore, due to obvious reasons. And yeah, so it's funny, right? Because Singapore feels, in some bizarre way, closer to home than Australia ever did. And perhaps that's a lot to do with the culture that I grew up with in Indonesia. Right?
Yeah. And so first question then off the bat, if I were to ask you, if anyone else had to introduce you, right? So would you introduce yourself as Indonesian, Australian, British, or Singaporean?
This is always such a hard question. So I, I tell people that I am Indonesian in the fact that I still consider it home, right? It's home because I grew up there, and all my memories growing up are there. And every time I go back, it's always like coming back home, regardless of the fact that I was traveling there once every 2 weeks, 1 week in, 1 week out, for nearly 2 years. It still felt the same. Still felt the same.
Okay.
That being said, though, like it's hard, right? It's hard to be able to explain otherwise.
Yeah, well, this is why I always find that the term global citizen applies to people like you and like many of the guests on the show, right? All of you have great stories. You grew up, different places, worked at different places. So yeah, I guess this really is the epitome of a global citizen. So the next question that I wanted to then ask you is, because Australia factored as part of your life only in terms of study. Technically, because your mom is Indonesian, your dad is British. How come you didn't go back to the UK to study? Why Australia?
I love beaches, Colin. That's the reason.
Well, the UK has beaches, right?
Arguably. Yeah. So why did I do that? Right. So I mean, it was a lifestyle choice, as well as also it was closer to home. Right. Reality is that 6 hours is quite different to 14. And getting to Jakarta at the time was it was a little bit closer. Also, my memories of Sydney. So I did travel to Sydney a few times actually when I was growing up in Jakarta, and my memories of Sydney were very very positive, right? And so made that choice. A lot of my friends who were in high school they went the other way, right? They went to London. Some went over to Canada, right? Not many of us headed down to Australia. I think I can count like on one hand the number of people from school that went down to Australia, right?
Okay.
So it was a fresh start. It was a fresh start.
Right. So then the controversial question that comes out, and these are for all the Aussie listeners and friends out there: Sydney or Melbourne?
This is actually a pretty hard question to answer as well. So Sydney if you like beaches, Melbourne if you like coffee.
You product managers never fail to amaze me. I always try to pin you down and then you find your way out. But okay, nice answer. Okay, so let's get back to your education. You did Bachelor of Science, and then your first role was it QA? If I'm reading it correctly.
Actually, it was branded as QA, but I was doing a whole bunch of different stuff, right? So I was doing context is that the company was doing a lot of sort of criminal screening, credit scoring, and things like that for larger organizations. So it was a bit of an outsourcer. So a lot of what I was doing was around, there was elements of research coordination and deep dives on certain individuals and sort of their backgrounds and things like that. As well as also doing a lot of like sort of testing of our processes and systems and things like that too, right? So really, that's where I sort of grew up into. I did have a very brief stint in like doing a bit of sales and marketing. I realized that really wasn't for me, and so I jumped back out again. I realized that it wasn't very, how would I say, at the time, well, it wasn't very numbers orientated, and that wasn't something which I was very keen on.
Okay.
So,
okay.
So that's a lot of what I was doing was a lot of sort of the manual and script testing and things like that, as well as also coordination of a bunch of stuff.
And that first role as QA, was it because you wanted to do QA, or basically you just took any job that was available right out of school?
Fell into it, right? So I basically was I was actually part-time employed at the company. They appreciated the work. When I came out of university, I just sort of dropped in and away I went, right? And I worked there for a good period of time, right? So that's pretty much it.
Okay. And this was all was this in Sydney as well?
This was in Sydney, correct?
Okay,
Yes.
okay. Because
Yes,
I believe that you worked in Sydney all the way up to Red Balloon, I believe. Yeah. Well, no,
SiteMinder.
SiteMinder.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's right. Yeah.
okay. Yeah. So first job out of school in Sydney, you were doing QA. We fast forward a little bit. You then joined IDC Communications. I'm jumping a few roles here, but this is the one that I wanted to sort of talk to you a little bit more. So you had a very interesting title here. You were the Program Product Manager for the CIO Executive Council. What on earth is
Correct.
that?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. So a little bit of history. So IDG and IDC are part of the same parent company. So IDG is the media side. The IDC side is the sort of the Gartner competitor, right? So the CIO Executive Council was it was a global department, institution, however you may want to call it, right? Which sort of sit within the organization, where it's serviced e-learning platform, right, for CIOs, CTOs, IT managers, and the such, right? And you sort of started to get a very broad view of how, like, for example, a CIO works in the government, or how they work at a bank, or how they work at a startup, or architectural firms. Very different ways of thinking, right? And so, at least at a strategic level, I learned a huge amount from those individuals. What was I doing specifically was product managing the e-learning platform there. So really, we had a competency test which people had to take to see sort of what part in their sort of journey to become a strategic CIO, yada yada yada. They were, and were they more on the operational side? Were they more on the transformative side, or were they more strategic? Right. And so there were very specific questions that were directed at them, which would sort of determine where they sat on this matrix, right?
Right.
And so we provided like a program at the time. It was called it was the Pathways product, right, whereby there was a component of like face-to-face learning, mentorship, but then there was also like the sort of the e-learning component, which was like doing the assessment, testing, and just seeing where they are in their lives or their careers today.
Yeah. So two questions, and you can choose whichever one you want to answer first. First one was this your first product manager gig? And the second question was the program part of it. What did it entail? Maybe you will start with, was this your first product manager gig?
I would say this was my first product manager gig. I mean, really, it wasn't like product manager per se, because it was like in Sydney at the time, product managers were very, 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 very early days, unless you were pretty much at Atlassian or BigCommerce. And so like it was managing the product on that side, and providing feedback in order to sort of prioritize certain things within the e-learning platform. The program management side of it was like really okay, so we had to coordinate to make sure that we had a course. People were doing their e-learning, but also doing their on-site mentorships and things like that, right? And we had to coordinate CIOs who are willing to give back to the community, right, as part of this council, right? So in other words, you would have people which were sort of sitting at in government, or they were sitting in larger organizations, and they wanted to give back some of the knowledge that they had attained, right, to become CIO to fledgling IT managers, CTOs, whatever the case might be, right? And so that was the program management side,
right?
So I was sort of doing a balance between the two. Yeah.
Okay. So the question that was interesting for me was, like, when you talk about program management, at least in the early days, right? This before Agile became popular, or before product management became a thing or the fad. Program management was usually more closely aligned with project management rather than product management. So were you doing sort of that project management side of things as well, officially under your title?
To be honest with you, in Sydney, because it was such a small department, right, I was doing a bit of everything, right? There was a bit of project stuff, there was a bit of program stuff, right? There was a bit of product stuff, right? And I had no idea at the time, to be completely honest, right, what were the boundaries between each of these. All I knew is that we had to make this successful in the Southern Hemisphere, and how are we going to do that? We just had to hustle, right? Like, that's what we had to do.
Okay. So then this begs the
Yeah.
question, right? How did you end up in this role? Did you apply for it? Did the recruiter come looking for you? Because your previous roles, you were QA, you were BA, and then your other company was also a BA, and then you jumped into sort of product management in that sense. So how did you land in IDG?
Yeah, so historically, so before I was at IDG, I was working for the University of Sydney through a contracting agency, right? So I was doing a lot of sort of technical BA work there, whereby I was going to stakeholders. So our job was to was it was a fun one, right? So what we had to do was amalgamate all the databases from FileMaker to like a centralized repository, which it, even beyond my time being there as the project went on, right? It was a very, very interesting project. So doing a lot of that, but of course there was not a lot of sort of customer interaction, right? And of course, so you're going out and you're interviewing stakeholders, and I was thinking at the time, I mean, this is all well and good, but I feel like that I'm not really solving a problem, right? I'm not really solving, I'm going out and saying, okay, right, collect requirements, put them into a spread, at the time, a spreadsheet, right? And then make sure that we prioritize things based on what we need to fix, which databases we're going to migrate first, all that sort of thing, right? And so I wanted something which was a little bit more customer facing, but then had elements of my analytical skills in place, right? And so this was a role which I had applied for at the time. Also, my contract was coming to an end. Things weren't looking so good at the time in the market either. As you well know, that was when
this was like
when the dip started to
2009.
happen.
That will be the GFC, right? Global financial crisis.
Correct. I was actually out of a job for like 3 months because from contractors are usually the first to go, and the project for the analytical requirements collection component had already been done, right? And so they didn't really want to kick off any other projects due to the crisis, and so my contract was terminated, right? In fact, the whole division, right? And so that's when I was like reassessing, okay, what do I want to do, right? And I again, a lot of these situations, I stumble into these scenarios, and it seemed like the way to get myself into a bit more of a customer facing role from a product standpoint, right?
But did you know what a product manager did at that time? Was this a role that was known to you already?
Nobody did. Right.
Okay.
Frankly, in Australia, at least, right, everybody was still trying to figure out roles. They started to see the word product appear in certain scenarios here and there, but really nobody knew what a product manager did, right? And I see the smile on your face because you're probably hearing the same thing everywhere else. And it's really interesting, right? Because this is around about the time when the Scrum,
Agile.
The Scrum Alliance was starting to sort of insert its tendrils into Australia. There was also, Scott Farquhar and Mike Cannon-Brookes, which was sort of building up Atlassian, right? And, there were other startups which were sort of bubbling up, but like nobody really had the clout of Atlassian at the time, right? BigCommerce was sort of still in relatively early stages, I believe, at the time, right? So it was early days. It was early days, right?
Okay.
It was early days.
So was it for you? You looked at the JD and like, okay, yeah, I think this is more customer facing, better than a step up to the BA role that I was doing. So therefore, let's give it a shot.
And it seemed like it was solving a legitimate problem, right? So from my perspective, I was like, I want to go off and contribute to to individuals, and I want to contribute to help people grow in their roles. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay, yeah. But it does, your journey kind of validates something that I was discussing with the first guest on the show, Ridwan Aminuddin. So if you haven't listened or watched it, go check it out, right? Because he was actually talking about how in university, like, his dream was to be like a business analyst or systems analyst. Yeah, I think those were the sexy roles and the predecessors to product management, I think, at that time. So you pretty much kind of did that, right? BA and then product management. So
yeah. It also gave me a lot of insight to how technology systems work, because you got to speak with a lot of people. And I guess the pinnacle was an event that happened in Brisbane when I was working there, and I got the opportunity to both watch Steve Wozniak present and speak, and as well be able to have a chat to him for 10 minutes after after the
keynote,
whole presentation, right? The keynote, and I just there was this one moment which I remember, which I was like, wow, okay, this is just really quite incredible. It just sort of sat with me for until this day, where Steve Wozniak was like sitting there, right after the keynote, and people came up and they wanted to take a picture of him, and they're all there with their iPhone 4s, right? All of them,
yeah.
right? And I'm like, wow, that must seem really bizarre to him, right? Like, even though it was not necessarily, Steve Jobs was, the history of that, but Steve Wozniak has a huge footprint in
Yes.
Apple and where it is today, right?
Yes.
And to know that that's his brand, that's his company, right? And he's the engineer, like he was the core engineer, like way back when. I just find I find that quite incredible. I find that incredible.
Yeah. So you had 10 minutes with Steve Wozniak.
Yeah, it was like a very brief chat. It was like inside a sort of like a space which was away from the stage type of thing. But like just had a quick chat to him and about where he was in his life, and he gave some very McDonald-esque answers. But it was really interesting because it's something that made him human, right? It was like somebody else was with me at the time, and they asked the question like, "Oh, what do you think about where China is at today?"
Yeah.
Right? Because China is pegged in the next century to start, progressing. We all know where China is at right now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really interesting to see that in hindsight. And his answer was really interesting. He's like, I would have no idea. I've never been to China before. Right? And I'm like, right? Like this man who's worth multiple billions of dollars, right, has never stepped foot in a country which is the biggest country by population on the planet and is pegged to grow like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
He has no interest. Right? And I found that, he said like that sort of humanized him a little bit, right?
They don't know everything after all.
They don't know everything after all, right? And and you fast forward now to 2020, and we're seeing where politics and technology and how things have changed so much in the 11 years. Yeah,
that's true. But wow, very interesting. So now let's then move on again. So you joined Red Balloon after your stint at IDG Communications, and you were the product owner over there. So again, was that move intentional, accidental, opportunistic?
No, intentional, right?
Okay.
I found out the hard way that in order for you to do well at your job, you had to not only like really care, have a lot of empathy for the job, but you also had to work with people who had the same mentality, as well as that they believed that culture was actually important, right? Now, this is something which I didn't really experience, I'll be honest, with IDG. And just hand on heart, it was a hard time there. But I cared enough about the product and what it was solving for that I stayed for as long as I did, right?
Yeah.
And so I wanted to pick a company which genuinely cared about its people, right? Now, Red Balloon at the time was sort of getting into a stage where it started branding itself as like, employer choice number one. And I still remember I was going through like, there were like very early articles about, best places to work as Atlassian, this, right? But like you had to find the right article because some of them seemed like it was paid, because one of them I came across and I remember going, PwC at the top, really? Like, I say that tongue in cheek because like my old man was a director at PwC when we were living in Indonesia, right?
Okay.
And I was like, I don't know about that, right? So anyway, I came across this company called Red Balloon, and I found out that they celebrated experiences and like and the selling of those, and also the role that was available at the time was looking after like how to get people within other organizations happier with their company, with the hypothesis that it would decrease attrition, right? And so that's I was like, whoa, okay, that's really cool, right? So so that's when I sort of applied for the job, and it was really it was before it was called Ready, right? It was called we call it the OPP, right? Was the Online Points Program, right? Which was an application which was sitting on top of the e-commerce engine for experiences at Red Balloon. So for anybody that doesn't know, Red Balloon is an e-commerce. It's one of the most successful e-commerce companies in Australia, and it provides now it provides like gift baskets and things like that. But generally, it was founded upon like basically packaging happiness and giving it to someone, which was in the form of an experience, right? So that's like skydiving, rally driving, whatever, right? And so, I still remember like, so anyway, the product was in relation to how do we ensure that we can give effectively points to people inside businesses in order to like for them to collect, and they can spend them on experiences themselves, right? Because the hypothesis again, was that they were more likely to stay at their company because, they were like, hey, that's really cool, right? Like I can, like, based on people saying thank you to me, right? I can collect points and then I can go and jump out of a plane because that's what I want to do, right? With a passion, right? And so, and I still remember, and I tell this story to many people, right? But I still remember my first day going into Red Balloon, right? And it was inside a hollowed out church, right?
Wow. Okay.
That was the office. It was really funky, funky, right?
That would be the definition of hipster right there, right?
Oh, it was like, if anybody watches this and you know where it is, it's in your Sydney geography. It's in Piermont, which is like hipster central, right? But it was really cool, like sort of like the Hayes class and everything. And I remember walking in, it's a very kind of like the startup feel, and I was like, wow, this is fantastic, right? So and so I started to meet the people, and then I realized, like, what the world that I had been in prior companies, right? All of a sudden, these people came to you with genuine empathy and sympathy, right? And you're like, it just took me aback, right? And I was like, this is actually the difference in culture, whereby people are happier because, for whatever reason, I wasn't quite sure until I had signed the contract and I joined the first day. On my first day, Megan Bromley, who was the HR manager, and so she's won multiple awards for what she's done at Red Balloon, right? And she's off. I'm not sure where she's at right now, but she's been gallivanting around. But I speak highly of her because she changed Red Balloon around in terms of what was actually a high attrition company before, right? And she came in and completely just changed the culture, right? And so she cared about it a lot. So when I joined, the first thing that I got was it was like a notepad, right? And on the notepad, it was like, what are the things that you really want to do, right? And I was like, what, really? Like, okay, cool, right? So I came up with some crazy ideas. Like, I want to be, at the time, I want to be on Spaceship One, Richard Branson, right? But then there were some other things, like I had never done hang gliding before, right? And I put down a list of up to 10 things, right?
Yep.
Anyway, fast forward 4 months later, right? And had got things up to speed, and I had miraculously won the one of the value awards at the company, right? And I was like, oh, it's a quarterly thing, right? So I got the quarterly month award.
Quarterly award.
And I was like, okay, so they're like, congratulations, Mike. We're going to give you $100 voucher. I was like, oh, that's very nice. And also on top of that, we're going to send you hang gliding. And I'm like, what? What? Are you serious? And they're like, yes, well, you had it on your list. That's what you wanted to do, right? And I was like, holy moly, that's like connecting your product, right, with the experience of the people within the company itself. So you're actually dog fooding as well as also making people happy with, I was like, this is just genius, right? And on top of that, like, I genuinely felt happy, right? And like, so the world in which I, sort of was at before, in the more corporate style, right, and moving into this style of working, right, it just sort of flagged this thing in my head. It's like, I'm never going back, right?
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, I haven't, right? So
yes, it was going to be one of my questions, actually, like, because I was like saying, hey, it looks like your career path has gone pretty much the startup scale up way, and you've never actually gone back to any corporate or big enterprises.
No, and people ask me all the time. In fact, at the frustration of my own wife, right, that I don't want to go back to corporate, right? But it's the reality is that you get so much more satisfaction out of either startup culture or hyper growth culture or whatever the case might be, right? And the co-founder of Red Balloon, Naomi Simpson, she does like a whole bunch of stuff, right? She's on Shark Tank and everything like that. But she's now she does a lot of investments in businesses because she believes in the same thing, right? And she goes off and she knows that like that's where the energy is and that's where innovation comes out of, right? And because these businesses move fast, right? Because they get the investment to do it.
Do you think that working in this kind of a culture where it's a startup, not necessarily a startup, but the culture is in which they believe in dog fooding, like you've mentioned, right? You're not just trying to ship something out, sell something, but you're actually trying to use it yourself. You test it internally, you believe in it internally as well. How much of an impact do you think that has on product managers versus working in it doesn't necessarily have to be an enterprise company, but they tend to have enterprise practices. How do you see that balance there? Because there's always let me give some context here, right? The debate or the discussion is always, how effective are you as a product manager or product leader in a startup where you do everything? It's a smaller company versus doing it in a much bigger company and structure. And having heard you talk so glowingly about the culture, I'm very curious to know, in your opinion, how much does culture play into the effectiveness of a product manager or product leader?
It's half the battle, honestly, right? So culture, and there's different types of culture, and we can probably sort of unravel that a little bit later on with different companies, right? But the culture whereby people are enjoying the work they do is in relation to the thing around whether they feel like they are providing value or not. Now, you usually find that people derive value if they are trying to fix a problem, right?
Yes.
The problem component, unfortunately, is a hard thing for a lot of people to attain because it's painful, right? And people don't like pain, right? That's part of your brain that goes, don't touch pain, right? Because that hurts, right? But then when you get used to loving the problem, right? When you get used to understanding and loving the pain, right? And you realize that actually that's what it takes in order to, make a good product or a great product even, right? And you dog food it, right? In order internally to understand that pain, right? You will get a better product, and you will find product market fit faster as a result because you're doing it internally. In fact, even right now at Brankas, we're doing this right now with a private beta product internally, right? And I spur this culture because it is so important for you to know what your customers, your users, whoever, right, what pain they're going through, right? And is your brilliant idea, your hypothesis, your solution actually solving for it? Or does it need tweaking? Or do you just need to scrap it and move on, right? But if you don't start with the problem, you ain't going to ever find it. You're just going to be chasing ghosts for the rest of your life if you just try and build on your idea, because, and I say this time and time and again, ideas are cheap, right?
Yeah,
ideas
that's
are cheap.
true. That's true. That's true. Fantastic. Let's see whether we've got more time, maybe later on, to sort of jump into that, because one of the things that keeps coming back in conversations on the shows as well is about the importance of culture, and I want to talk a little bit about product culture with you if we have the time. So, but before we do that, I'm still not done with the story. So let's now fast forward, and your first role in Singapore was with Ematic Solutions. How did you end up in Singapore?
Yeah, so I'll just ravel a little bit back here. So from Red Balloon, I moved into I got a promotion into a role at SiteMinder, which was a startup which was moving fairly fast. I think they had just closed 30 million in their A. It was in a situation where, number of employees was like 60 or something. I can't remember exactly the number at the time. By the time I left 16 months later, it was 600 people, right? And so that was my taste of like, well, hold on to your, because like Revolut never went through that. They were happy staying below 100 people because their revenues were very healthy and they were just happily moving along, right? Whereas with SiteMinder, it was like acquisition, it was a growth culture, like let's go, which was really interesting because they never had a proper North Star, they never had a proper vision, but they still grow, right? Because like they knew they were solving a problem, right? So anyway, so I was running teams over there, and I was again, as I was saying, I was there for like 15 or 16 months, and then I got a call from a headhunter based out of Singapore, right? And it was pretty much out of the blue. I think my resume was up on some website, I think Angel or something, I can't remember, right? But he picked it up and he was like, "Huh, interesting, right? This guy is like sort of had like this producty background. He's also Indonesian background, and he's lived in Indonesia for a long time. So this guy calls me up out of the blue, right? And he says, "Okay, Mike, tell me your situation, right?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, so my personal situation. I have my son and my baby girl is coming along in April." And he goes, "Wow, okay, that's things are sort of moving along. I have an opportunity for you, right? At a company called Ematic, right?" And of course, I'm like, "Ematic? I haven't heard of it. How big is it?" "Oh, 15 people, right?" And I was like, "Whoa, okay, right." So they're still small. And I'm like, "What do they need?" And he's like, "They need a product lead, right?" And I'm like, "Why don't you find somebody in Singapore?" And he laughs. He's like, "This is in 2016, right?" He laughs and he goes, "Where, Mike? Where?" Right?
Right? All the Singaporeans listening, stabbed to the heart.
Right, and that was very interesting to me, right? Because I was like, "Huh, that's a weird." Like, I would have thought that things were a little bit more progressed. And apologies to the Singaporean viewers, as though, but that was literally the response, and that's the me being my transparent self, right? So anyway, fast forward, I talked to the CEO. He was from Seattle, and then also to the CTO, who was the other co-founder, who was also grew up in Seattle. They were friends from a long time ago, but he was Serbian, or Bosnian more specifically. And so I had a few conversations, whole bunch of people, right? And then I was like, talked to my wife, signed a contract. My little girl was born on the 2nd of April. We moved at the end of May.
Wow.
Right. So that was a hectic time, time to say the least. I would not ask for anybody to ever go through that themselves.
Traveling with a 2-month-old is no joke. I traveled with, I think my son was less than a year old, and even then it was tough. So doing it with a 2-month-old, that's brave. That's really, really brave.
Yeah. It was also all the selling, right? What we had to do with the house, everything. Yeah. It was an intense period, but we felt like that it was the right thing, right? So that's what we did. And so we moved up to.
Yep. Sorry. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say we moved up to Singapore, and I started at Ematic on the 8th of June, right? So I think that was the date that I started. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. My question was going to be, what was it that attracted you to Singapore? Was it the job, or the opportunity of the job, or was it the location in that sense?
Multiple factors. So my wife is German, and so her family is in Bremen.
Werder Bremen. Yes.
Werder Bremen. Yeah, that's right. She's actually in a small town outside of Bremen, about 20 minutes, called Riede, right? So she, it was closer for her to get back to the family, right? Her parents, and her brother was in Frankfurt. And then my father and then mother was in Sydney, right? And so Singapore was a hub, right? Yeah. And we had a lot of friends all the time, which were flying in and out of Singapore, right? So geographically, it was starting to make a lot of sense for us to do this, right? Because, her parents were getting older. My mother and father wanted a little bit more, okay, yeah, this is our world now. And
go away.
Okay, go away to an extent, right? Yeah, stop hating on PwC, right? And so like Singapore was that aspect. There was a financial aspect, of course, in relation to it. We're not going to lie there. There was a safety aspect for two young children, right? Singapore is probably one of the best places you can be in the world. I have thoughts about if the kids are older than that, right? But like for younger children, it certainly made a lot of sense. And also it was very close to Indonesia. Culturally, there was also the aspect of how close it was to Indonesia. And then finally, my best friend is Singaporean, right? So, Singaporean Indonesian. So he, he sort of influenced a lot of my decisions as well.
Right.
Of course, as soon as I moved here, he moved to Perth. So
it was an exchange.
It was an exchange. We know we can't be too close to each other.
Everybody needs a little time away.
Yeah.
But so moving to Ematic, like you were moving, new country, new child on the way, or rather your child had just been born, sorry. And it was also your first senior leadership role, right? Because you moved as the VP of product to Ematic. How easy or how difficult was that to make that transition in the new country?
That's a really great question. Not easy is probably the best answer. The TLDR. I was managing teams at SiteMinder. However, I wasn't the VP of product there. Yes. Right. I was reporting into to Hannah, and so I moved to Singapore, knowing, because of conversations with people, that the product management space was still very, very early days, right? And so I knew that it was going to be a challenge to hire a product team, right? Especially on a shoestring budget, right? Especially in Singapore, knowing that we can't really hire or import a lot of product managers, right? And that was sort of the space, right? And so like what was I doing, right? So like I had to figure out exactly what were the products, talk to customers, figure out all of that stuff, because I was the first guy, right? I was the first product guy in the team. There were no product managers. I think there was maybe a situation where investors were saying, "Need to hire a product team," right? What's a product team, right? So there was a little bit of that. And so like implementing like sort of the processes in place, even in advance, so that we knew where we wanted to get to, so that we knew what sort of hiring we needed to do based on the products that were live today.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that was a challenge, right? And so that spurred me actually to get in contact with the General Assembly, and then start doing workshops for them, right? And start teaching product management in Singapore. Right, and the reason is because I noticed that the difference in where product had got to in Sydney by the time I had left, and the sorts of conversations that I was having with my team in SiteMinder were not occurring. In Singapore, wherever I went. I started reaching out to many companies and finding out where people were at, and they were just sort of figuring things out. First class that I ran at General Assembly, right, it was very telling. I had a sysadmin there. I had a project manager there. I had a salesperson there. I had the chief of innovation for some big credit checking company. These people were from so many different. I had marketing people as well. So many different walks of life. Right. It made me go, they have no idea what it was to build a good product. Right. And what product management was about. And so that endeavor was very important. Right. Because it meant that I could try and figure out where people's headspaces were, but it also was like sort of a potential hiring channel, which didn't really turn into a hiring channel, unfortunately.
Okay.
But at the same time, it still helped me really understand and also teach, right? And that's something which I'm passionate about. I do mentorships. In fact, I'm actually doing a mentorship for an individual tomorrow, right? And I still to this day feel that this is very important, right? So hiring, building the team, figuring out what we needed to do was a difficult thing, especially for a very global team.
Yeah. So when you joined Ematic, you were the first product hire, you were saying.
Correct. Yes.
Which basically meant that regardless of what your title said, you pretty much were the first product manager, which meant that you were very hands-on, I would imagine, at Ematic.
Exactly. Yeah. So there was it was a huge balance between how do we make sure that we prioritize correctly, do the producty type stuff, talk to customers, all that sort of jazz, and then at the same time build a team, right? And I think a lot of product leaders which are watching this will appreciate how difficult that is, right? Both from a execution standpoint as well as also from a political standpoint, right? Within a company and like how things happen, right?
Yeah.
And you're laughing as well. I can see that there's potentially battle scars. So but like it was manageable, right? It was manageable in the sense that like as long as you understood, like in my mind, I kept going like I just got to understand the pain of this. It's like what do I need to do to get there so that I can then assign product managers to, rather than the products themselves, the hypotheses in order to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Right. And so that helped building out the core team at the initial stages. So the first hire I did was I poached somebody from SiteMinder, and
nice.
And then brought them in to work on one of the products. We hired another person who was at Razer at the time. Is a South Korean. Now he's based in New Zealand. And there were a few others that we sort of started wrapping in. Now the other component, of course, was talent within the team and how to grow it, right? So a lot of what I had to do was, and I did the same thing with further company Xendit and Brankas as well, is where you've got to do a mentorship component with individuals who may be interested with products within the company, because number one, that you find out if those individuals are you find out very quickly if those individuals are that way orientated to that sort of critical thinking components of understanding the problem first.
Yeah.
Right. Number two, like, are they dogged, right? Like, are they execution focused? Are they really do they have enough empathy to actually solve the problem? Right. And so that's something which is, again, that's a difficult thing to find in this part of the world, right?
It really is. Yeah. So here's the question that, again, coming back to the fact that you joined, Ematic at that point in time, would you consider them early stage startup, 15 people, so they were pretty small in that sense?
100%. They were very early stage. They had just landed their next round of investment, so hence why they had capital. They had also onboarded a couple of very big customers, which were really helping them out. And so like they were going, the plan was to sort of scale up, right? It was to scale up. And so, but at the end of my tenure at Ematic, like we were at 214 people, right? But it was very interesting to see like a sort of a hyper growth company like that, especially based on sort of the budgets that we were playing with and how we were having to manage customers and all that, right?
Yeah, the question that I had with relation to that stage of a company was, for you, when you joined Ematic, first product hire, what did you decide to focus on first? Was it to sort of put the proper baselines in place or practices in place so that you could build the team? Or were you trying to sort of scale the product in that sense, like, hit KPIs for growth and for revenue and things like that? Or was it a combination of both? Because I think that would be interesting for listeners as well.
Understand the problem of your customers first, right? Get on calls with customers. I was on calls with customer success at the time because the customer success team was naturally the largest because they already had customers, but the product wasn't very developed. And so it was literally just like find out, and this sort of mentality comes from my time at Red Balloon, right? Because every person at Red Balloon when they first joined was like, what they have to do is get on a call with as a customer success representative, right, and talk to the customer and understand what it's like when you get yelled at, what problems they're facing, all that sort of thing. Because then you start going, okay, right. So the problems immediately become clear when somebody tells you third or second hand, right? Oh, there's a customer problem. You're like, oh, okay, right. There's a customer problem.
It's nowhere near as raw, right?
It's not as raw, right? When somebody is filling your ear with rage, right? It's a very different scenario to like your customer success person. Like, I work with this guy. I'm not going to be, somebody which is going to be, angry about it. So I put it that way.
Very polite. Very polite.
Very polite, right? Because like, because he's a product guy, like I want him, my stuff to get prioritized, right? So I don't want to anger him, right? And so like, oh yeah, well this customer was a little bit annoyed by this, Actually, it's like yelling and expletives, right? And so like, that is there's a very Chinese whisper situation, right? And so this is the thing that we did at Ematic, and from there, understanding our products came second. Third was like starting to set up the very skeleton crew that was going to be required in order to get the products sort of separated out, because it was all sitting in one backlog. There were three products at the time with a with a ESP platform, which was sort of coordinating with emails and things with email service providers, blah 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 blah, right? And we had to try and figure out across these systems, right, where does product come in, right, and then what can they accelerate as fast as possible, right? Yep. So that was sort of the approach. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not saying that would be the same for every company, but like I do highly recommend to individuals on the call which are going into this, like even if you're the first product guy in a startup, right, which is flagged as the person who's going to lead the team, right? Start with knowing what the customers need and not what they want. Understand what their problems are.
Yep. Very, very, very sound advice. All right, let's move on, because otherwise I may not be able to get all the way to your current role, which is where I'm going to go to now. So you spent time at Xendit as the Chief Product Officer, and then you also moved to Brankas as the Chief Product Officer. The question that I had here was, your career seems to be going towards the fintech space. In that sense, again, is that intentional, or is that just by opportunity?
A little bit by opportunity, a little bit by intention, right? Xendit was solving a critical problem in Indonesia in how funds were being moved around, right? And this is not just a problem to Indonesia. I mean, many countries face this, but Indonesia's home, right? Yeah. So, and I wanted to get stuck into a company whereby I will be able to help contribute to growing, the products and a better rail for Indonesians to be able to transact, right? Like that's what I wanted.
Yeah.
And so fintech just happened to be that rail, right? Fintech, I don't see fintech or hotel tech or e-learning or whatever, any other tech, right? These are all products solving problems in the end, right? And one of my best friends who now works at Atlassian, I still remember a conversation I had with him back in Sydney many, many years ago, was that I would never get myself into banking, right? I still remember that conversation. And I started to realize the reasons why I didn't want to get myself into banking was more to do with the fact that I just didn't like the way banks controlled environments, especially in this part of the world. Right, Singapore is more regulated, but it's all cowboyish outside, as you well know. And so I it wasn't necessarily me hating on the bank; it was me hating on the philosophy, right, of hierarchies and families getting involved, and are they actually focusing on the people and solving a problem for the people, right?
Yeah.
And so so Xendit was sort of a inroad into this, right? Like being able to provide a separate rail to be able to get funds moved around within Indonesia. And so that sort of then led me to open banking, right? Brankas.
Yeah.
And so CPO, I grew a team to, I think it was, I can't remember now, it's ended like 17 PMs or something, 16 PMs. And then I moved to Brankas, where I am, now I am focusing on sort of the open banking initiatives, which are really, it's very interesting. It's very exciting. It is insanely frustrating, but the problem is clear, right? Yeah. The problem is very clear. And this is like how people which are sitting in rural areas, people which do not have access to not even financial services, like financial means, right? In order to do the things that they need to do with their lives, grow their lives, right? And of course, there's going to be fraudulent activity, 100%, right? Yeah. But like, if there is not an injection from the other side for people which mean well, right? You're never going to get a situation whereby the poor and the rich
the gap
start to come back together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because and this is something which sits very, very close to me, because I tie that back to when I was mentioning earlier on. A lot of the trips that I used to do when I was younger was due to my father. During summer holidays, we used to spend like 2 to 3 months up in Manado and the northern eastern part of Indonesia, right? Closer to the Philippines than it is to Jakarta, right? And seeing what poor was really like and what they have access to and how much has not changed from those years to even today, right?
Yeah.
And what do you put this down to? It's educational infrastructure, it's financial infrastructure, right? It's people not being able to get access to these things, right? And so I genuinely think that open banking, as I've seen what's happening in Europe today, right? What's happened in Bahrain, and what's happening across in pockets around the world, is that it's opening up services, and you can see some of the bigger players are scared of it because it's diversifying control,
Yes.
right? And this is very important for creating more equality. At least I believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
At least I believe.
Yeah. Well,
and so that's why I joined Brankas. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if anything, at the worst case, even if it doesn't bring the equality, it's reducing the gap at the very least, right?
Correct. I mean, you can never have a completely balanced system, right?
Yeah.
It's even Mother Nature is continuously working that out, right? I mean, we're part of Mother Nature, right, as well. But we have the sort of self-conscious to change it, right? And so here the thing is that this openness, like open source technologies, work and operate in a very similar way, right? In that things which are doing very well and drive traction and people enjoy using and all that sort of thing, they are adopted more than the things which are harder to use, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's literally natural selection at play, right?
Yeah.
And so the openness for banking, right, or any other any other industry for that matter, fosters the same thing. Now I can tell you, people are afraid of that, right? Some people won't necessarily point fingers or anything like that, but they fear it because it means that power is diversified, right?
Yeah, it's
diversified.
Okay, and so the other interesting question about both Xendit and also Brankas is that they are products, and correct me if I'm wrong, they are products that are primarily based on, they serve the Indonesian market primarily.
So Xendit does serve the Indonesian market. Brankas serves multiple markets in Southeast Asia, right? And so Xendit is much more of a payment gateway, right? Very similar to Stripe, very similar to Braintree, whatever, right? Whereas Brankas is an open banking platform where we're not interested in becoming a payment gateway or anything like that. Right?
Just a connector, right?
Yeah, we're a connector. We work with banks to open their APIs, right?
Yes.
A lot of payment gateways consume them, to be honest, right? And other fintech-based organizations. But there's also an aggregation model on the other side, whereby we service, an API through a single endpoint, so that you're connected to all the banks, right?
Right.
And so this is, this is actually getting into even more of the infrastructural level of financial technology, right? And how that works. And for me, that's something that's, like, I say this a couple of times to other people, but like, if open banking doesn't occur through regulation in this part of the world, and I know it's being discussed by many countries, right? Then my job right now as a product person is to drag a lot of these core banking systems out of the Stone Age and into the limelight, so that other companies can connect to them, right? Because honestly, that's how openness is going to occur. Right, that's how openness is going to occur. You just have to talk to any fintech company, like whether it be a lender or a PG or whatever it might be, in Indonesia, in the Philippines, in Thailand, not so many in Thailand, in Vietnam. What you'll find is that all of them will say the same thing, right? I hate connecting to banks. They'll say it. Right?
I agree.
And this is the reality. Yeah.
Okay. The reason why I asked that question earlier on about where the products, which markets they were serving, was what is your experience in terms of, do you have any advice for companies that are trying to build product teams where they serve A, multiple markets, and B, where you may have product managers who are in more than one location? Because if I did my homework correctly, Xendit and Brankas have more Xendit than Brankas, I would say, have product managers that are based in more than one location.
Actually, so Xendit has product managers which are really based between the two locations, Jakarta and Singapore.
Okay.
A lot of the mentality behind how Xendit operates is that they want to centralize product management, and that's totally a completely fine model, right? Because and hence why I was traveling so much for Xendit, right? Was because had to be with the team to make sure that things were sort of like the face-to-face interaction was occurring, etc., etc. At Brankas, and COVID-19 has a little bit of an influence on this, right? But the product team is dispersed, right? So we have, myself here in Singapore, people in Jakarta, we've got people in the Philippines, we've got people in Thailand, and people in Vietnam, right? Yep. And very similar to Ematic, the team is, is quite, sort of dispersed out.
Yep.
My learning from Ematic, right, is that you can have a dispersed team. The problem is the time zone, right? So we had a very what we refer to as a follow the sun model at Ematic, right? Mm-hmm. We had a product manager based in Hawaii. We had a chief architect based in San Francisco. We had somebody based in New Zealand. We had somebody based in Brisbane, and we had somebody based in obviously there's a Singapore office, Vietnam, and then Bosnia, right? Okay. So stand-ups were happening later in the afternoon. Recs were being developed early in the morning by product people and then pushed into development, which was the Bosnian team, in the afternoon/evening. Testing began again the next day, right? So this follow the sun mechanism was happening. The good thing about that is that you had to be pretty damn sure about your recs and your user stories and everything like that to make sure that there were no limited questions being asked, because the moment there were, you've lost the day.
Yes, correct.
And so that's a problem, right? Mm-hmm. However, it meant that user stories that were being generated by the team on the product side were meticulous, right? And so it got to a point where engineers really weren't asking a lot of questions about edge cases and things like that because they were already contained within these stories. Mm-hmm. This is really great for growth products.
Yep.
Very difficult for product which is brand new, right? When you need to hustle and get things out the door quickly. Right. So fortunately for the growth teams, that was working. For R&D and hustle, that was just happening localized within Singapore between myself and the CEO. Right.
Right.
And so that was what was happening at Ematic.
Okay.
Centralized model at Xendit. And then finally at Brankas, we have within 2 hours of each other, the product team. Right. Mm-hmm. All I can say is, if you're committing to stand-ups, say for example, you're doing your Scrum methods, or if you decide to do Kanban, whatever it is, right? All I can say is it all comes down to discipline, right? We're all learning discipline now with COVID-19, and we're forced to do this, right? However, this should not change the fact that if you were sitting inside the office with that person, you would have a different level of discipline. Actually, no, that's not the case, right? You can still have that same level of discipline. Get to meetings on time, make sure you give your stand-ups, try and keep them down to less than 10 minutes, that type of stuff, right? You can still have the same discipline remotely, right? As you may have in a face-to-face situation. And so at Brankas, for an example, right, we're very disciplined with this sort of thing, right? Mm-hmm. In fact, I would say, if anything, COVID-19 has made us more efficient, more effective, right? Which is bizarre when I say that, when I think about what's happened, right? But people now are just going, first and foremost, a lot, you speak to most people at Brankas, is that, and this is very unique to this company. In fact, the only other time that I really genuinely felt this was at Reploon, is that you speak to anybody in this company and the vision is clear, and we want this to happen in this part of the world because we think it's important, right? Yeah. And urgent, actually, both at the same time, right? And so when there's a permeating feeling of this through the company, which means that's half honestly, Colin, that's half the battle, right?
Yeah.
And so this is my advice is it comes down to discipline. It comes down to the fact that if you organize ceremonies and whatever, right? Like adhere to them. Don't just make them up and then just not show up, right? Because like otherwise you're just like, unfortunately, people are just going to lose interest in the process and things are just going to fall apart. They're going to fall apart.
Yep. Very interesting. So, I'm sorry, excuse me. There is a question that's sort of related that I think it's very pertinent given what you've just explained. And that question is, so I want to say it, but I'm going to err on the side of being wrong. I think it was Marty Kagan who said it once, or I can't remember whether it was in his book or whether when he was speaking in Singapore, where he was saying that, product management is not your typical 9 to 5 job in that sense. Like if you wanted a predictable job, go get something else. Product management is exciting, blah, 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 and all that. And that's great. The question I had for you was, do you find that product management is a role that has more commitment in that sense where, for example, if we talk about work-life balance, that, product management is one of those roles that you don't get it. Keen to understand from your experience about what it's like in terms of, carrying that burden of a product leader or a product manager.
That's a really great question. My answer to that is you choose, right? You choose. And the reason why I say that is that it's definitely possible to do product management in a 9 to 5 situation. I've experienced it. I've seen it happen before. I've seen products grow and done fairly well in that sort of scenario, right? However, what you'll find is that people which, outside the boundaries of like, okay, manage the backlog, keep user stories up to date, blah, 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 right? Or the project type stuff, okay, set up my vision, et cetera, et cetera. The products that you find accelerate, right, are you see a product team, right? And you don't ask them to stay online until whatever time that they need to stay online to, right? I give you an example, like a couple of my PMs at Brankas, I'm there and like suddenly they'll message me, Mike, we need to chat. It's like 11:30 at night, right? And it's like, we need to chat right now. I'm like, okay, what do we need to talk about? It's like, okay, right, we need to decide whether we're going to do this or this based on these integrations with these banks. All right, okay, let's go, boom. And you just jump in, not even thinking that it's 11:30 at night. What you find is that those sorts of product teams will lead to, sort of the esteemed hockey stick, right? They will, right? Well, to an extent at least, because it's not so much they're thinking, hey, I'm product managing something, right? They're thinking, we need to solve this problem, right? Because if we don't do it, somebody else is, right? Yeah. And the thing is that if you do the 9 to 5, yes, of course, like you can absolutely do that, especially in a product which is already available in the market and you got some KPIs around it, which are like, okay, yeah, so like we got to grow by 8%, right, or something like that. Yeah. What you find is that the product people, which are going and hustling and doing the things which people don't see, right? You find that these products are meticulously crafted, right? And they are everything which, we were talking about it the other day, right? So a customer came back to us for this beta product that we have for Brankas, which is in the Philippines right now. And a customer came back to us and said, wow, this is so simple to use, right? And the thing about simplicity, right, is the ignorance that comes with that thought process, right? Yeah. Because the amount of effort to make it seem simple, as you well know, Colin, right, it's massive, right? Like to make the iPhone, just so simple, right, to use, or the Android device, so simple to use, right? Like if you think about it, like the programming is required for you when you're swiping left and right, and then how fast the screen moves, all that type of stuff, and that's a physical input on top of that software which detects it. Oh my! Like the amount of effort, the amount of teams that are involved just doing that is unbelievable. Right?
Agreed. Yeah.
And so this is the thing. If you care enough about it to make it that simple, to make that user experience really something to enjoy, whether it's API related, whether it's UI related, they're both interfaces in the end, right? Mm-hmm. The reality is that the people that put in the effort, they will come across that simplicity faster. They will.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great stuff. Right. Look, we're gonna have to end this really soon because we've been chatting for over an hour now, and maybe this is a good opportunity for me to say I need to get back here for part 2 because there were a lot of things that we wanted to cover. I even mentioned that if we had time, maybe we'd jump back to it, but we've literally gone over time, so maybe a next time. But we always end this show with a song. And so I'm going to go into that right now. Apologies for the listeners. If you're hoping we'll jump a bit more, I would love to do that. Maybe one day, if we ever get to a point where the people are really willing to listen to really long form, we will. But I think at this point in time, 1 hour is me pushing the limit. So let's not try to push it too far. So now back to the song. You decided to choose the song "Kids" by this artist called MGMT. Tell us a bit more about why you chose this song.
Yeah, sure. I remember seeing Dritz's
session,
his podcast, his session, and he was like a little bit taken back by the question. And I have to say, I was like, wow, okay, I'm similar. So I was like, oh, wow, okay, that's a really cool question. Okay, so why did I pick Kids by MGMT? So American pop band. So basically, back in 2011, right? This is when I was, sort of getting the cold feet at IDG and all that sort of thing, right? My then girlfriend, now wife, went to go to the Enmore Theatre in early March 2011 to go see MGMT, right? And both her and I, we liked this band because they had fairly recently released the Kids song, and it was just such a awesome song to listen to, right? Just to listen, but then when you get into the lyrics, it's even cooler, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, so she's there and she's got VIP tickets, right? She's got VIP tickets, and like the band's going off, the crowd's going off. It's just an incredible sort of atmosphere, at least what she's telling me. I wasn't there because I was in Jakarta at the time, right? Right. So she was there with her best friend, right? And so like they're watching the MGMT, and anyway they get to the song "Kids," and through the song the drummer throws into the front of the crowd his drumstick, right? And I've got right here his drumstick.
Nice,
right?
nice.
Which is so Will Berman, right? So he threw this drumstick, and my wife's the one who caught it.
Wow,
right?
wow.
And so she's just like, obviously she's going nuts and all that sort of thing. Back before you have kids, you really enjoy this stuff. And so this is what happens. And she tells me like, wow, like she tells me the story like, hey, I got the drumstick. We still have it to this day. It's still even chipped because of how hard he hits the drums, right? It's quite incredible, right? Anyway, fast forward, right, like a week, and I'm in Jakarta, and my friend goes, hey, like let's we gotta go meet this other friend named Kemang, if you're familiar with Kemang.
No.
But like it's like South Jakarta, right?
Okay.
But it's like a lot of like small bars and clubs, and there was this very niche bar which had not been open for very long, right? Okay. And so like we went to this bar, and my friend's friend was like, hey, do you mind if I bring a few friends along with me, right? And I was like, yeah, sure, no problem. Like, come out for a drink, and I was like on holiday at the time, so relaxing, blah 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 blah, right? And so like we're sitting there waiting, and they're like delayed, right, because of the traffic, whatnot. And I was like, who's the friends, by the way? He's like, I don't know, whoever, right? She's at some concert at the moment, whoever it is, right? And guess what? His friend, she turns up, right? And she's got the band for MGMT with her.
Oh, nice. Very nice.
Right? And I'm like, what? It's like just a week, right? And it was like a very closed room place that we were in Jakarta. So it was like, obviously nobody had known that they were showing up.
Wow.
Right. And so I ended up like just telling the story about, my then girlfriend, the drumstick, right? And like I was just like, why were they even in Jakarta? Like, That was just mind-blowing to me, right? And apparently they had like some sort of gig that was going on there, which I hadn't known about, right?
Wow.
And so, had a bit of a chat and drinks and whatever. But like, it just really, goes to show like how interconnected everything is without you even knowing it, right?
Yeah.
And so why, and if you ever have a chance to look into the lyrics of the song, it's like it's about kids growing up with the fears that are around them.
Yes.
It's a very popular song.
Trees that are waiting to be haunted or something like that. I still remember the chorus.
Yeah, that's right, exactly, right. Baby is born, crying out for attention. The memories fade, like looking through a fog mirror. So it's very interesting because, like, the way that I sort of associate product is with, like, especially when a CEO or a co-founder start a company for the first time, a product for the first time, right? It's like a child, and it reminds me of when they hand it over to a product manager or a head of product for the first time. Is that they're like, latching onto it, right? And it's very similar to kids, right? But by the time they go to school, you're like, no, that's not the way that you're supposed to do it. And the teacher, what they're saying, I don't think it's 100% right? And it's about letting go.
Yeah.
It's about letting go and realizing that the market is, that the world is going to influence that thing. And regardless of how much control you think you have over it, you really don't, right? And so therefore, you've got to take a step back and say, hey, there are mentalities, there are philosophies, there are a vision that you need to put in place in order to help that person morally get directed in the right place. You can't micromanage it anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And this is the sort of the song is in relation to kids, I know. But hey, look, in the end it worked for me.
Nice.
Got married, had kids, right? And we still talk about that story. I mean, like I said, we're thinking about putting this like up on a picture on the wall someday, right? But it's just really funny, right? Because like how everything is so interconnected, and if you don't put yourself out to certain opportunities, like you'll never know if they will happen. So,
wow. I have to say, hands down, this is the most interesting song story that I've had on the show so far, bar none. This is the coolest. And part of the reason why I decided to go with the song. So like the typical thinking is, why not ask them to recommend a book or a saying or a show. And I was like, let's do something a little bit more offbeat, like catch people a little bit more surprised. So this is really great. I do have to say though, the video that you chose, which will be up here somewhere, it's more safe. They had the video with the kid and the monsters. That was quite disturbing, I have to say. I feel...
It was very, very, very disturbing, and they obviously wanted to hammer home a point. I didn't share that one because I wasn't sure if I should. But if you're curious about what Colin's referring to, the most viewed video of, I think it's 140 million views now or something. It's crazy. Yeah. But the most viewed video is it's
the one with the kid. The reason why I felt
being traumatized.
Yeah, exactly, because you watch the video and the kid is like crying all the time. Oh my gosh, why would you do that to a kid? So
yeah, one thing's for sure is that he didn't have to try to make it cry.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's the end of all the questions I can ask. I really hope that I'll get you back a second time. I think there's so much more to unpackage based on your wealth of experience. But yeah, hopefully we'll get that done sooner rather than later. So yeah, before we end today's show, is there anything that you would like to leave our followers, listeners, viewers with?
Yeah, I would say, and this comes back to a question I ask during interviews all the time, right? And people, my product team's sick of hearing me say this, but basically, the question I ask is, if you're based in Indonesia or you're based in the Philippines, right? What problem do you want to solve? If I gave you $1 billion, right? That's a lot of money, right? And I ask that question because I don't actually care about your idea around solving the problem. I care about the thought process that it takes in order to understand the problem, the critical thinking that is required to get closer to the pain, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you can get yourself into a habit of having that mindset, just like at Brankas, we've literally instilled it as a behavior, which is now permeating the entire company, not just product. All docs are based on this problem, hypothesis, solution statements, right? And you get yourself into that mindset, right? Then product will become a lot more fun, a lot more easy, and you'll feel more fulfilled. You will feel more fulfilled, right? And I think that's what I would like to leave the audience with.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. That's really good stuff. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Mike D. Well, we all call him Mike D, who is the Chief Product Officer at Brankas. And it's been a really fantastic show. Thanks for coming on that show. And to all our listeners and viewers, thank you so much for being with us up till now, episode 12. And as we continue to recover from this very strange season of history that we have as humans, please continue to be safe. And as Mike D likes to say, remember, what problems are you solving? I'll catch you at the next episode. Bye bye.